Hey everybody, today Rahdo runs through his top 10 game boards, part 2. Yes folks, that's right, I'm back. Last time I went through my 10 favorite board game designs from the point of view of how do they actually improve the quality of the gameplay. I mean, what clever tricks can a board game developer use to turn just a flat piece of cardboard into something that enhances the overall experience? Not from aesthetics, but from a design perspective. Now, I promised I'd be back, and I am here today to instead talk about the pretty, the gorgeous, the lovely, the aesthetically pleasing boards. This is going to be my top 10. Well, I was going to say my favorite pretty boards. That's not really right. Aesthetically, not the most aesthetically pleasing necessarily, but the most aesthetically interesting, because I still kind of have to come at it from the point of view of the gameplay experience. And the reality is there are so many drop-dead, stunningly gorgeous game boards out there today. For me to do this, I just have to list 100 of them and say they're all tied for first, basically. I mean, the bar is so high now that it wasn't good enough to just say, oh, is it pretty or not? Never mind the fact that, of course, the subjective nature of what I think is pretty versus what you think is pretty makes it kind of a meaningless exercise. So what I want to do is talk about games that use their presentation and their beauty in an interesting way. Sure, all of these boards I think are conventionally gorgeous, but they're smart about how they're gorgeous too. Their aesthetics, well, again, I don't want to say enhance the gameplay. I already did that. But instead, they just enhance the overall mood and atmosphere and experience because of clever things they do, not just because they're pretty. They're more than just a pretty face, is I guess what I'm trying to say. That's what really attracts me. When it's not my turn and I am waiting forever for Jen to decide what she's going to do next, and when she goes through a bout of AP, these are the boards that impress me the most, that just kind of fill me with a warm glow inside as I cast my eye over them while waiting for my turn, saying, yeah, oh my gosh, that is so smart. Look how beautiful this is. Look what they have done here. So, again, this is my second one. So if you haven't heard the first one, if you haven't heard my first top 10, go hit that eye up in the top right corner of the screen and go check it out. I'll wait. Okay, you're back. You want to hear about the pretty? 'Twas beauty that killed the board game. So let's get going with my number 10, Time Stories. And right off the bat, that should kind of clue you into the kind of aesthetics list this is going to be. Because one, I think this is a gorgeous board. The kind of pared back, minimalist, stark aesthetic, just pure white. I think it does what it's supposed to do. I mean, this should feel like I'm sitting at a computer terminal in the year 2525 or something like that. And and just everything has this clean, gorgeous aesthetic. But while the board itself is really great, it serves a purpose, because the nature of Time Stories is you travel from location to location to location in different time periods and all that stuff. And every location is effectively a new little miniature board that lives on the main board, because there are a bunch of individual subsections of a given location, and you use, again, your gorgeous, lovely, stark, simplistic game pawns to move around from space to space, take a card, flip it over, and see what kind of story you are going to read. The thing about Time Stories is, whether you have been a fan of all of the different expansions or not, because there have definitely been highs and lows and hits and misses and all that, but they've all been uniformly, stunningly gorgeous art. So really, Time Stories is like 100 or 200 gorgeous boards, these little mini boards that live on the holder, which is the big board. And I absolutely love that. Never mind the fact that the art in Time Stories is often a crucial element of gameplay, because hidden within the art are subtle, important clues that you often need to suss out. So it's important that the board writ large does not detract from the important board, the actual space you travel around on. Never mind the fact, then, there's other things they can do too. They've come up with so many interesting ways to fill these codex slots, different ways to create the maps that you travel around on. And I'm just I couldn't be more impressed with the aesthetics, the gorgeous aesthetics of Time Story, my number 10. Now let's move on to number 9. Sorry. The Ancient World by designer Ryan Lockett, artist, I should say. He is a brilliant designer. You can see any of the run-throughs I've done for any of his games. I'm always very impressed. Even when it's a game I don't necessarily like, I'm still impressed by the clever, interesting gameplay mechanisms he innovates or elaborates upon. But his art is always something. I mean, the number of times I've said he has created another board that I want to go to, more than just about any other board game artist out there. He creates these wonderfully lush, illustrated environments that just draw you in, and you just drink them up, even though they're actually, to be honest, relatively low on detail, but they are high on ambiance and mood. I mean, these are the board game industry, the closest thing the board game industry comes to, like, Legend of Zelda cel-shaded gorgeousness. And of all of his boards, they're always gorgeous. They're always, so evocative and dripping with emotion. I love the Ancient World the most, I think, because of the kind of implicit loneliness that is present. I mean, maybe it's because the theme of this game it's basically Shadow of the Colossus, the board game, because players are building up the forces needed to take out these big super titans that menace the environment. But we never get to know the Titans. They're just here. They're a threat. We take them out. I love their presentation, just as this looming presence on the other side of the mountains. It's just out there somewhere. We could just happily live our idyllic lives in this lovely place and sail to other lands. And the way these rock spires have these things spiraling around them, the clouds, everything about it, and the way that the scrolls that represent, this is a worker placement game, I should say, represent what different actions you can send your workers to. The way they just blend in this kind of parchment presentation is absolutely lovely too. But all that aside, that's not why I put this on the list. The main reason is the row down at the bottom, which at first glance looks kind of boring, right? Here's the thing. I said, Ryan Laukat, for my money, is one of the best board game artists working today. A big part of this game is drafting cards. And as you're playing, this row of card slots down at the bottom of the board is pretty much always full to the brim of little vignette, little snippet cards where the art bleeds right up to the edge, so there's no borders or anything, and it creates an overall just wonderful presentation. This big, sweeping, epic saga of a land with all these little individual snippets of personal stories, whether they're monsters or soldiers or weapons or whatever they might be. The whole thing comes together in such a lovely way that I had to. I mean, I thought a lot about all of his boards. I went and spent a lot of time looking at all of his boards, but for me, the Ancient World is Ryan Laukat as his best, and that's why it's at my number 9. But then we move on to number 8, Mice and Mystics. And while I'll be honest, the gameplay of this game, there's a lot I really liked, but there was a lot I didn't like. But certainly one thing you cannot fault about Mice and Mystics is the presentation. The gorgeous, drop-dead, stunning art. The you are there verisimilitude of this game. Because it's basically a whole bunch of tiles. I think the game comes with 7, and they're all two-sided, so maybe there's like 14, and you're seeing 8 of them here. But they're all just exploding with color, and probably more than anything else, the interesting, really strong, light and shadow that you see that just really makes them feel so much more alive, and again, inviting and evocative than you normally see. So I'm really, really impressed with the core art. Never mind the fact that the minis are great and the dice are great. Everything about this game is just absolutely, an 11 out of 10 in terms of production, but there's something about the art here that I think is extra special. You may notice in all of these pictures, there seems to be a real focus on cobblestones or tiles or individual sections of pipe. And that's because the beauty of this board is also servicing the functionality too. Because this is a tactical skirmish miniatures game where bad guys move around from space to space, our guys move around from space to space. And it's a scale where we are actually taking on the role of anthropomorphized mice who were former lords and ladies and advisors to the king who have been shrunken down, converted into mice, and now they're having to deal with rats and cockroaches and stuff like that. So the scale is great, but every individual cobblestone, every individual tile, every individual pipe, and for every one of these tiles, they've come up with an interesting visual language, is a space that you move your characters through. If you're going to move your characters, 1, 2, 3, 4, you can see it doesn't. So often with tactical skirmish games, they've got lovely art, but then they just put a grid on top of it, and that's how you know how to move around. This game doesn't have a grid. The art is the grid, and it's gorgeous. I love it, and I love that extra attention to detail that really is what puts Mice and Mystics so far above. There are so many wonderful boards that, for tactical skirmish. I could have mentioned a lot of them, but this one is head and tails above the rest, including its sequel, Stuffed Fables, which didn't stick to that and just went for, hey, okay, let's just put the grid over the top, or they did in a nice subtle way, but nothing compares to this. This is absolutely amazing. I love the aesthetics here, but then I love the functionality of these aesthetics in my number 8, Mice and Mystics. But now if we move on to number 7, we have got Swinging Jivecat Voodoo Lounge, which I know it may not look like much looking at this. It's just like, what? This is really kind of boring. It's just 4 big quadrants of colors. I guess there's some people in there, and there's a bunch of numbers. How could this possibly how could this beat Mice and Mystics? Here's where it does. It's when you zoom in. It's when you zoom and enhance. There is so much detail. This is a game where we are basically voodoo spirits trying to inhabit the bodies of all these swinging hipster in the 60s in their various lounges. I love every one of these characters. Interesting. Oh, look, here's Amelia Earhart next to the mummy, next to some, all these characters. And again, the function this serves when it's not my turn and I'm thinking about what I'm going to do, this game doesn't have to be anything more than just a whole bunch of numbers. It's actually a fairly abstract area control game where you're putting discs on top of the characters to try to grab certain areas and get runs of them and stuff like that. I've done a run through for it, so you can go see what that's all about. But it's so much more than just a bunch of numbers. Every one of these characters has a story. What's the deal with this guy pulling a gun on the thing from the Black Lagoon? And just some a Beetle Bailey-esque sailor next to Zeus, or no, I guess that would be Poseidon. I love it. It's funny. It so perfectly captures the vibe of what this game is about. I mean, it's right there in the title, Swinging Jivecat Voodoo Lounge. And if you see the rest of the pieces that come with it, the way you keep track of your victory points with a martini glass, and oh, hey, there's Sherlock Holmes while we're at it. Why not? I just absolutely adore this to bits. It's great. And then on top of that, this stuff is so cool, it's so nice that you don't just put cubes on the board to, claim all these different numbers based on the numbered cards you play. It's so important because the art is such a crucial element to the overall experience. The game actually comes with these cool little clear acrylic discs that you put on so you can still see the art. Even though you've claimed these things, don't obscure the art. Don't obscure this wonderful, lovely board. My number 10987, Swinging Jivecat Voodoo Lounge. Now, let's move on to number 6, Clans of Caledonia. And, man, folks, I don't know what to tell you. Yeah, it's really simple. This is doing the same kind of thing that a million other Euros have done out there before. But the presentation of this board, and it's a modular board, by the way. What you're looking at is actually 4 different boards kind of smushed together around the center axis, and you can flip them and turn them over. So you can get a lot of replayability with different board layouts. But I mean, this is actually a snapshot taken of the board, but it looks to me like a computer render because it's just so clean. And I mean, I was trying to think about what is it about this board that makes it stand out for me above, I don't know, Archipelago or Terra Mystica or something like that. I think there's a few key things. One, the fact that all the different places, they have different default values based on those little gold coins. I love the fact that there's a drop shadow under those coins, making them feel like they're an actual thing sitting on the board. It makes the board feel more alive. I mean, you can actually look. These are actual real game pieces that, and their drop shadows in this particular picture I found kind of match the drop shadow of the coins. But I also love the way that the grid is, let's see, it's kind of hard and then soft. They did the same trick, by the way, with Stuffed Fables, where it's not just a bunch of hard grid lines everywhere obscuring the art, but there's just like these kind of faded out spots in the center. So really, it's just about the vertices where the grids connect is what they're actually trying to show you. So that minimizes the grid. It minimizes the impact on the aesthetics of the grid without actually impacting gameplay at all because you can still easily read the grid. But getting back to that shadow too, an interesting function of the game is when you're going to play a 2-player game, they tighten up the board by saying there's no building on the entire outside rows. And rather than, the way they do that at a glance to let you know that the outside rows are different, they didn't want to mess with the aesthetics, so they did a bunch of subtle things. The outside row, you can see, has, again, kind of a soft shadow line all the way around it to make it separate. Daisy's going crazy about something. I assume must be fine. To separate the outside in case you're playing a 2-player game. And then also there's just little creeping bits of clouds you can see that are only, again, on these outer edges as a reminder that in a 2-player game, they are not part of the simulation. But the important thing is the clouds are casting shadows too. All told, I think it's a combination of those things that really make this board just sing for me in a really meaningful way. I absolutely adore Clans of Caledonia. It's probably my favorite, colorful, beautiful, colorful countryside game because of its aesthetics. It's just look at it. Just look at it. I don't know, maybe I'm crazy. You tell me I'm crazy, but I think this is so far above and beyond what most games trying to do this same thing achieve. I absolutely adore it, and that's why it's my number 6, Clans Caledonia. But now, moving on to number 5, we have got Column of Fire. Now, Michael Menzel, I could have said, hey, top 10 prettiest boards. I could just rename this top 10 best Michael Menzel boards, quite frankly. I mean, he is so prolific. He has done so many gobsmackingly gorgeous, memorable, classic boards. Legends of Andor, Stone Age, Pillars of the Earth, World Without End. I mean, the list goes on. It's amazing. And what he's really known for is this incredible attention to detail that's almost impossible. He always really plays with scale. I always think of it kind of in a playful manner because at first glance, any of his boards, they look like, yeah, that's actually a real place. I totally get it. But then if you stop and think about it, wait a minute, there's no way this could be a real place. If I actually think about the scale of these people compared to these buildings, compared to this building over here, compared to that tree over there, it doesn't make sense at all. It doesn't fit. If I were to actually physically go into that as a 3D space, it would just be kind of weird and distorted. But the way he designs his board, when you step back and look at them, that just disappears. The trickeries of scale and perspective just fall away. And I think why I love Column of Fire more than any other board for him is that's one thing I didn't say right up front. I don't want any repeat artists on this list. So if I pick my favorite Menzel board, the same way earlier I picked my favorite Lockett board, my favorite Menzel board is Column of Fire. Because this pushes his playful, messing with scale to the extreme. Because in the real world, there's no way Kingsbridge could just be right across basically a little river from Paris, which is just spitting distance from Antwerp. And never mind, oh look, there's Seville way off in the distance. Just over the next hill. This is a game, that obviously kind of encompasses, the better part of Europe, I assume, because that's just being true to the original novel. And I could imagine a regular board just having kind of a boring static stayed overhead, kind of zoomed in thing showing, England up in the top left and Italy down in the bottom right, and then just the boards. But he didn't do that. He made these places, he created connections between these places that are so crucial and important to the game itself. And I would assume to the characters in the original novel. And that's why I love it. Never mind the fact that it's just absolutely, jaw-droppingly gorgeous with a million little details. Like these two guys getting on the boat, where are they going? Where are they coming from? What's their story? While it's got all of that, more than that, it's, again, just this epic. The first time I saw this, I had to laugh out loud. It's audacious. It makes no sense. But again, when you just pull back, it makes all the sense in the world. It's just gorgeous. Michael Menzel, he is brilliant. I love his board game art and Column of Fire. His most recent one, by the way, I don't even know if the game's widely available yet. I will be doing a run-through of it sometime in the next month or two, hopefully, once I get to America and I get all my games. But anyway, it is my number 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. It's my number 5, Column of Fire. But now let's move on to number 4. Trickerion. This board is intense. And if I had to think of one word to describe it, I think it would be opulence, because this is set in a Victorian era of stage magicians trying to travel to town to get all the resources they need to put on their best tricks and get the tricks, the resources, maybe hang over in a dark alley and play some dirty pool and whatnot. This board, like Menzel's work, is so full of detail. So, there's people in the dark alley just going for a swim in the channel. Sure, why not? It has absolutely nothing to do with anything. But again, I can't think of a better word than opulent. This board, it's just so lived in. I mean, this feels alive. This feels like, if I almost looked at it cross-eyed, that it would actually come to life and all of these would actually be an animation of all these little Victorian-era stick figures just kind of moving around, casting eerie shadows because it's lit by, one of those old-style projectors that were done by candle. All that stuff. That's the nature, that's the setting of the game, and the board is so true to that. Never mind the fact that this has got to be probably one of the most brilliant victory point trackers I've ever seen, because you're a magician, you're trying to put on the best show to score victory points here. The victory points are the members of your audience staring, at the stage. There I am on the stage trying to put on my best magician show, and the more people who love me, the more people who watch my show, the further I go up the victory point track. I love that. It's a clever little thing. But again, those are the kind of aesthetic choices that really, fire my engines. And that's why when I started thinking about this, Trickerion was like one of the first ones I thought of. I knew it had to go on my list. I just didn't know where. It's stunning. I absolutely love it. It's my number 4, Trickerion. But let's move on to number 3, where we have got Lewis and Clark. I'm sure this wasn't the first game where I saw the art of Vincent Dutrait, but this is the board that made me fall in love with him and maybe make him my favorite board game artist of all time. There is just something about the way this man uses color. This board, in another artist's hands, could be so drab and dull. Because well over half of it is dirt, is what we're looking at here. But it doesn't feel like that. It's, I guess it's because it's not really brown dirt. It's kind of more kind of a bright, vibrant yellow. And I know there's that marketing trick of always mixing blue and yellow together. You see that in movie theater posters all the time. And, maybe it's just a trick along those lines. But it's just so rich and vibrant. And this doesn't do it justice. You have to sit in front of it at a table and just say, oh man, this is so gorgeous. This is so lush. This is so wonderful. And the details, the compass, all this extra stuff. Another thing that's really impressive about this too, getting back to that same trick I was talking about with Ancient World, Ryan Lockett's, you can see where there's a draft of cards that are always out. Vincent Dutrait does great cards, and having, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them always on display, showing real historical figures kind of looking over this land that they are setting out to explore. Again, it just kind of helps the narrative, the feel, the ambiance, the way this presentation just pulls you in and makes you feel it, but in a nice, positive, friendly, happy way that, to be fair, is probably not true to life. But, again, he cannot help but just make worlds that are just so lovely. It's the same as, Ryan Lockett. This is a world I want to go to. This is a world I want to explore. It's so great. And also, if all that weren't enough, again, this notion of playing with scale. This is another worker placement game. So it's no surprise that the worker placement spots really have to pop. So turning what would just be a speck you shouldn't even be able to see on a map of the continental United States, making the majority of the board that it's playful, it's fun, and it just feels right. Because I know the developers really worked very, very hard in the development of this game to pay homage and tribute and try to get depictions of Native Americans and the relationship between Native Americans and the early explorers, the really, really early explorers, not talking about the pioneers, tried to really put a lot of focus on that. So I love that too. I love everything about this board. That's why it's my number 3, Lewis and Clark. But hey, let's move on to number 2. Dungeon Petz. And now at first glance, this might be an example of what I was just talking about. Oh, that doesn't look very pretty. It's kind of bland, isn't it? And to be true, it is. This is where, if Vincent Dutrait did it, I don't think there would be these shades of brown for the dirt. And look at that green of the grass. It's just, and to be fair, this is probably a little bit more desaturated. The real game, when you see it in front of you, it is a bit more riotous of explosion, but it's not too far off. Here's what puts this in my number 2 spot. It's not the big picture, it's all the little details. I am amazed by this board. Again, it's another worker placement board. So, the worker placement spots, these are actually painted onto the board. Look, here's a little guy. He stepped in the fresh paint and he got it all over his shoe. There are so many crazy, fun little stories that reinforce the nature of this game. This is the, if your imps in the game get injured, they get sent to the hospital. You've got these 4 little worker placement spaces that are these little gurneys that represent what they're going through. Here's some more tricks with the wet paint. Somebody walked through this, this worker placement spot and tracked paint elsewhere. This worker placement spot, this is the auction block. It's an actual auction block that a guy is standing on. I put my workers here. It feels like they're occupying the space that will let them do the actions they've come to do. This is a little progress tracker where we see how well everybody does relative on scoring in these different contests. And why not actually make that a little bandstand full of people watching the contest that we're actually doing, that we're actually participating in? And you can even see them kind of reaching out. Oh, there's even a little tentacle dragging somebody into their doom. And even the more grungy, the less explosive in terms of color spaces are interesting once you pay attention. Like, hey, here's a place where you can put a pin. Over here's a place you can put a pin. Oh, look, there's 2 guys doing 2 cans of the string listening to each other. That didn't need to be there, but it is. It's so wonderful. And if that weren't enough, hey, look, there's some imps playing Dungeon Lords, the prequel to Dungeon Petz. Why not? Just while you're at it. Honestly, I've never even noticed that till just now. This water bubble creature turning into an impromptu shower. Wow, so this is where they obviously go to sunbathe. It's their version of the beach. I love this. I could look at this board. Well, I can confirm. I have looked at this board for hours because Dungeon Petz, I've played it a lot. And this is a game that is very thinky. You often will find yourself just waiting for somebody else to decide what they're going to do. And this game gives you so much to lose yourself in. I've looked at this for hours. I still enjoy looking at it. I've enjoyed showing it to you and sharing it. It's a masterpiece. It's a marvel. It's my number 2. Dungeon Petz, but even still, it's not my number 1. And my number 1, I originally thought, my gut feeling was Dungeon Petz was going to be my number 1 because I know how much I love it. I know how much Jen loves it too. She would definitely, it would be one of the first things she thinks of. But the more I thought about it, and the more I looked at it, and the more I evaluated things, the more I decided my number 1 has to be Runebound 3rd edition, which is weird. I have a hard time putting a finger on this the same way I did for Clans of Caledonia. Because at first glance, this is nothing special. This is just a big, this is a grid that doesn't even try to hide the grids. It just lays them down, doesn't do anything clever like Caledonia did. But the world you travel through, the highways and byways you go on in this map are so lovingly rendered in so much detail. The Shrine of Arts, there's the actual shrine right there. Or Fort Roderick, I can imagine traveling to Fort Roderick. The sense of scope and space. This is the opposite of Menzel, playing and tweaking and goofing with scale. Although to be fair, I know this is goofing with scale too. Obviously this would be much smaller. But another thing I really love too is it doesn't avoid the hex. It embraces the hex. Here is a 2x3 bit of forest that fits this hex. But if you pulled the hex away, you wouldn't know it was a 2x3 hex because it just feels very organic and natural. Same for Echo Lake here and the rivers that branch off and follow these hex lines because there's a gameplay element to fording a river when you're trying to travel around this world on big epic adventures. But probably the thing I love more than anything else is, there's lots of little towns like North and South Red Ridge, but just to the west of it, here's Tamalier, and they don't actually, the way they deal with the scope of a massive city as opposed to the little villages, they just have this cool atmospheric, artistic rendering of the city of Tamalier, or, where's another one? There's one down here, or Riverwatch. That makes that space pop in such a huge way because it completely breaks the conceit of everything else about this map. And it means, because cities in Runebound are incredibly special and incredibly important. and putting a lovely border around them and putting the sigil for the town. And by the way, the town's cards for its inventory lie off the side of the board, and you can see Riverwatch, there's its sigil and there's its sigil again. They do that throughout. Every city has its own sigil to match. This is the city with, where's another one? And this is a rendering, so it's showing characters walking around. But Tamalir, if I look over here, here's Tamalir again with the same sigil and whatnot. Another thing that's really great too, a big part of this game is traveling around the world, adventuring, and you put, as part of setup, all these little cardboard chits that are in different colors, 3 different colors to indicate what type of encounter you have. They pop so nicely on the board as you're playing, because those are the other big thing. You're either trying to get to cities or you're trying to get to these adventures, and you're traveling the roads to get to them, or you're going off-road, which will slow you down. Everything about this board. I mean, look at this swamp, the Blackwing Swamp. Why would I want to go to a swamp? I love the way that swamp to river to forest to hills, which are a different type of movement. Follow the river all the way down. It just feels right. It just feels real. Sky down, the little paths in the mountains. Again, like I talked about before, there is a playfulness with scale. This is impossible, but again, I guess like Menzel, it doesn't feel. It feels real. It feels lived in. It feels alive, and I love it. It so enhances the overall quality of the experience of the game that the more I thought about it, the more I just had to make it my number one. I just love it to pieces. Runebound, 3rd edition. Go figure. And that's it, folks. That's a quick run through of my top 10 weird list of favorite aesthetic designs in board games. Am I crazy? Yeah, I'm sure you're going to tell me. But if you want to hear about all the ones I didn't talk about and all the cool, interesting tricks that those other ones do that impress me to no end, as always, wait for my next podcast at podcast.rahdo.com. Although nowadays I'm putting podcasts on the YouTube channel as well, so you can't miss it. I'll revisit this and I'll talk. Oh man, there were I think I've got like 30 or 40 games I could talk about that didn't make the list, and all of them deserve for doing really cool, clever, interesting things. But folks, I'm going to stop right there and say thanks very much for watching. Have a very, very nice day. Talk to you later. So long. Bye-bye.